Marcos Jr. also had a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden. Today, we will be joined by officials and key experts to share their assessments and recommendations on the future of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. And to open today's discussion, let us welcome Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit, President and CEO of Strat-based ADR Institute, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Joy. Good morning to everyone, to our guests from the diplomatic community, to our friends in media, to our Filipino champions of defense and security in our country. Before we begin the program, I would allow me a few words to pay tribute to our chairperson, Secretary Albert Rosario. Indeed, he led a meaningful and purposeful life as a staunch advocate of Philippine independent foreign policy and a champion of democratic values. His contributions to the advancement of shared democratic values and rules-based international order were reflected in his life's work at the Department of Foreign Affairs. He exemplified the greatest level of statesmanship, integrity, and patriotism. It was a privilege to know and work with him. I've known him since birth, since in the Philippine term, he was barkada of my dad after their university days. At Strat-based ADR Institute, we believe that continuing his advocacies, particularly on the West Philippine Sea, is the best way to carry on his legacy. In our last event, 2 weeks ago, he was actually with us online before he took I heard the socials are still happening at this moment. In Strat-based ADR Institute, we have been proud of our stance that we need to maintain a rules-based international order in a multipolar world. As a result of increased competition and cooperation among states, the Indo-Pacific has become increasingly complex and multipolar. Maintaining a rules-based international order is more crucial than ever as geopolitical developments continue to bring new challenges, not only to the Philippines, but also to the region. It should be viewed and understood as a shared responsibility to which all countries, including the Philippines, may contribute effectively. By protecting the current regional order and promoting shared democratic values, nation-states can thrive in an environment wherein they can coexist and strengthen their diplomatic and economic ties. Collectively, securing the peace and stability of the region requires multilateral cooperation, as well as the elevation of diplomatic relations with allies and other like-minded partners. This illustrates a strong message against those that try to undermine a rules-based international order. In the Institute, we continue to advocate the promotion of the Philippine national interest across all government policies and initiatives. And since 2014, 2013, when we first did a national survey, at the time, nobody believed that there is public support for us filing the case. We continue to do so, especially after the July 12, 2016 victory. On foreign policy, our latest survey showed, which was at the end of last year, the survey showed that the United States continued to enjoy the trust of most Filipinos as we defend our sovereignty. The results have been consistent since we first tracked this in 2016. Cooperation in a diplomatic, military, and economic domains enables the Philippines to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity while pursuing our strategic interest. In the same survey, it also reveals that 8 out of 10 Filipinos believe that the Marcos administration must strengthen our military capability to effectively address the issues in the West Philippine Sea and conduct joint maritime patrols and military exercises with allied countries. Modernizing our defense capabilities allows the Philippines to respond to internal and external security risks effectively and strategically. This can be complemented with defense cooperation with like-minded states, particularly in the form of joint patrols and military exercises. People will always ask me, why do we like, as an institution, to run surveys? It stems on two things. It's the political scientist in me. We don't comment if it does not reflect quantitative data. Second, maybe, is that at the end of the day, a very simple understanding of what government should be doing. They only exist for the Filipino people. And the only scientific way to understand the views of the Filipino people is through the surveys that we run nationally twice a year since 2016. Going back to my earlier point, this is demonstrated in the recently concluded Balikatan military exercises between the United States and the Philippines, which Australia and Japan also participated in. Deepening cooperation is also seen in the announcements of new sites under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. I remember in 2012, 2013, myself and my colleague, Dr. Renato de Castro, with some private sector individuals, were invited in the United States to discuss and to learn more about the EDCA, where then we launched with our then partner, Center for Strategic and International Studies, the so-called Philippine-US Strategic Initiative that brought us some of the satellite pictures that you all appreciate, that brought us opening for public officials from the Philippines to travel to the US to get an opportunity to speak and discuss our views. And this was through our chairman at the time, then Secretary Albert Rosario. Aside from the defense and military cooperation, 53% of Filipinos believe that protecting maritime resources and the environment in Philippine territory is the most important reason to strengthen our ability to defend and protect our seas. So for the Filipino people, across demographics, across geographic area, on top of mind, it's not about war, it's about basic things as marine resources, about protecting the rights of people, our fisher folks and communities in the coastal community. If you remember a few years back when Chinese militia ship rammed through our fishing boat, we saw this interest rise to 9 out of 10% of Filipinos. And this is, again, it cuts across geographic and demographic areas. So that means you see, and I used to tell my colleagues, my young colleagues, when we first used the word West Philippine Sea in 2012, it was even a joke to our ASEAN neighbors. What is the West Philippine Sea? And even international community does not understand what the West Philippine Sea was. But now it's in the top of mind of the Filipino people because we brought it out there. And this is within our rights as a sovereign nation, within even our own exclusive economic zone. With various elements attempting to tear down the rules-based international order, particularly in the West Philippine Sea, the Marcos Jr. administration must continue to engage with like-minded partners such as the United States, Japan, and Australia, among others, to secure Philippine waters and contribute to the security of the region. The current administration must implement a responsive, strategic national security policy that enhances the capacities of our own military, our own Coast Guard, and protect the livelihood of our fisher folks. The Philippines must continue to pursue a truly independent foreign policy anchored in our national interests and the welfare of the Filipino people, and goes beyond the strategic competition between the United States and China. Again, good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning in our hybrid seminar.
All right. To host and moderate our event today, we have Dr. Chester Cabalza. He is the founding president of the Manila-based think tank International Development and Security Cooperation, or IDSC. He advises national leaders, multinational companies, and embassies on defense and security issues. He also teaches at the Department of Anthropology at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Chester Cabalza.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for that kind introduction. First of all, we thank Professor Thindo Manhita for setting the tone for our program this morning, and we salute Ambassador Albert Rosario. Okay, for our first speaker for this morning, as we proceed to the second part of our program, is Honorable Jose Victor Chan Gonzaga. He is the Assistant Secretary of the Office of the American Affairs of the Department of Foreign Affairs. However, he is part of the delegation of our president in Washington right now, in as much as he would want to deliver something for us online. He is currently engaging in e-socials right now. So let's proceed to the second speaker. Our next speaker is General Emmanuel Bautista. He is the former Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He will be discussing with us the building new EDCA sites, opportunities and challenges in the Philippine security landscape. General Emmanuel Bautista served as the 44th Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. It was during his time as head of the AFP that the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement was signed between the Philippines and the United States in April 2014. After his retirement, he assumed the post of Undersecretary of the Office of the President from 2014 to 2020, where he served as the Executive Director of the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea. To share his thoughts on building new EDCA sites, opportunities and challenges in the Philippine security landscape, let's all welcome General Emmanuel Bautista. Sir.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Good morning, and it's an honor to be sharing my thoughts with all of you today. I'd like to share my thoughts on the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. As was said in the introduction earlier, I was the Chief of Staff when this agreement was signed. And indeed, we pushed for the signing of this agreement and we advocated for it. And let me just share my thoughts on why we did that. And also, I will be coming from that perspective, from the military strategic dimension of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So, I will be discussing the strategic context of EDCA, what it means to us Filipinos, and the challenges and opportunities that lies ahead. First, the strategic context. Let me begin by situating ourselves in the Indo-Pacific, where the center of the strategic competition is right now. We have a US-led liberal order and open economic regime, but we have a challenger, China. And there are territorial disputes which can be potential sources of tension and conflict. These are indeed flashpoints in this competition. Now, more importantly, what are the ramifications of that for us Filipinos? One, a US-China competition will inevitably involve us. I've been saying this about 6-7 years ago, but now it has come to mainstream discussion among our analysts and strategists. Why? Because the Philippines, we have a mutual defense treaty with the Americans. But treaty aside, the fact is we are a key terrain, our geostrategic location. A key terrain is a feature, the control of which will give you a marked advantage over your adversary, and that is what the Philippines is, a key terrain. But that competition aside, our main issue with China is its aggressive actions, the transgression of Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights, regardless of whether there is a US-China competition, that aside, regardless of whether we have a treaty or not with the US, fact is, there is aggression going on, there is transgression of Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights, and that is our main issue. And of course, we have all seen the militarization that has occurred in the West Philippine Sea, and its proximity alone poses a direct threat to the main archipelago. And indeed, even as we speak, there's a war going on. China is waging war in the gray zone, in the information realm, economic and other aspects, not necessarily a kinetic military conflict. Now, but let me cite the Panatag Shoal incident in 2012. This was a stark realization for us, and it motivated us to think about where we are now and what our strategic direction will be in the future. It highlighted our strengths and weaknesses in terms of capabilities or national power, and we have seen what our situation was given that threat from China. Relative to that threat we face, if you analyze the instruments of national power, we are weak in terms of economy. No contest. Our economy is very inferior to that of China. China, one of the biggest economies in the world. Militarily, no contest also. The status of our military is in no way near China's capability. Well, we can fight diplomatically and in the information realm, but really our strength was legal. The law is on our side. And that is precisely the reason why the Philippines took the case to The Hague for arbitration, because among the instruments of national power, that was our only strength. And a reality check during that time, during the Panatag Shoal incident, revealed that we really have no deterrence, to deter aggression from other countries. And that, in fact, highlighted the need for us to upgrade our capability, and certainly our military capability. So that incident in 2012 really was a realization for us. So that in 2014, note that we signed EDCA in 2014. Now, what does EDCA really mean for us? As I said, it was our strategic move to put us in a better position to navigate those complex situations we were thrown into. Note that it is not a standalone measure, but a part of an overall effort. an overall strategy. And let me just highlight that EDCA is for the defense of the Philippines against all threats. It's about upgrading our capability to deter aggression. I mentioned earlier that we failed in that respect. We failed to deter aggression in the West Philippines, certainly in Panatag Shoal. And that deterrence that I'm talking about, it's basically anchored on two things, a Philippine deterrent. It's one, it's our unilateral military capability, as I said, that is really not that great. But secondly, we complement that with our alliances. Well, it's not unique for Filipinos. Other countries, even middle powers, they have alliances. No country really stands alone, even if they are more powerful than us. Now, talking about deterrence, our intention is to achieve a minimum deterrence capability, a minimum credible defense posture, as articulated by the Department of National Defense. And EDCA contributes to that credible deterrence. In terms of fulfilling the requisites of credible deterrence, one, it is aiding us in the development of our military capability. That is essentially our modernization program. In terms of bases, development of bases, capabilities, not just about weapon systems, but also bases, readiness, even sustainment and logistics. Secondly, if we are to deter, we need to be present. That means physical presence in Philippine territory, showing the flag in Philippine territory, not just in the West Philippine Sea, in other areas, in Batanes, in northern Philippines, and elsewhere. We have to be physically present there, and EDCA certainly contributes to that. It demonstrates the cohesiveness of our alliance, one of the important requisites of credible deterrence, the cohesiveness of the alliance. And more importantly, it's the messaging that it delivers, that the alliance is strong and cohesive, and that we will do what it takes to defend our country. Now, as I said, EDCA does not stand alone. It is in the context of the Mutual Defense Treaty. It's one of the agreements implementing the Mutual Defense Treaty. Aside from the VFA and also MLSA, it is primarily for the defense of the Philippines. That is from the AFP point of view. That is why we were pushing for EDCA. It's for the defense of the Philippines against external threats. That is the main mandate of the armed forces of the Philippines. And the priorities we were looking at is where the threats are emanating from. The West Philippine Sea, Northern Philippines, and other areas, even our eastern side, where we have the Benham Rise. It is also for other non-traditional missions that the AFP performs, and that is humanitarian crisis. In the event of a Taiwan contingency, certainly a humanitarian crisis is possible. Imagine, in a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, what happens to the Filipinos in Taiwan? Over 150,000 of them. What about the Taiwanese people? Where will they go to? Note that during the fall of Vietnam, the Vietnamese boat people sailed to the Philippines, crossing the vast South China Sea. Taiwan is just across the Bashi Channel. And so we need to address that. We need to be responsive to that. And certainly it's for disaster response also. Uh, Back in 2013, Super Typhoon Yolanda, internationally named Haiyan, that was also a realization for us. That super typhoon, the magnitude of that overwhelmed not just government capability, but our national capability. And we were fortunate that the international community stepped in to help us. The first was the United States, who came in and responded to us immediately with a carrier task force during that time. And so that is what EDCA really means to us. For deterrence, to deter aggression, for the defense of the Philippines, certainly. And the threat is emanating from the west and from the north. Note that in Batanes, we have deployed forces there, Marines. In fact, even back in 2014, I already issued a directive to deploy Marines in Batanes to deter possible aggression. We do not want what happened in the West Philippine Sea happening also in our northern islands. And so we deployed forces in Batanes. And to support that, we need bases in northern Philippines to be able to support those deployed forces. And certainly those were considerations in the determination of the EDCA bases. The last four, three of which are in the north. Note that back in 2014, while we had 5 EDCA bases designated, the intent really was not to be limited to 5. The intent was really more than that, to cover all the areas where we need bases. And certainly through EDCA, there is a possibility to develop those bases. If you will note, we really don't have much in terms of budget to develop those bases. And certainly support from our allies can help. Now, given that, what are the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead? Challenges, in strategy, in war, anything is, it's dynamic. Anything can happen. While you have moves, there are counter moves. And while we are developing bases, certainly the adversary has counter moves. And you will see that in action, even as we speak, in the information realm, a battle for narrative and information is happening. And therefore, we must be prepared to counter those counter moves. And that's a big challenge for us. The battle of narratives, the battle of influence operations, negating each other's gains, regaining the initiative. And we have to fight that war, that information war. Another challenge is achieving national consensus for us to be able to really confront a bigger adversary. We need to move as a nation and to advance the Philippine narrative. We notice even some Filipinos are advancing the Chinese narrative. But we are all Filipinos here. I mean, with respect to our guests here, we need to advance the Philippine narrative as a people. That is, in essence, the whole of nation approach. Note that we introduced the whole of nation approach back in 2010. Initially to address internal security operations. And now that whole of nation approach is also applied to territorial defense. And certainly to other areas, it has now become mainstream strategy of government to address many areas, including health and other issues. Because while we are not really a strong nation, but if there is cohesiveness among Filipinos, if there is a will among Filipinos. I remember back during the Panatag shoal incident, but that was after 2012. In 2014, when they were harassing our fishermen with water cannons. And one of the reporters asked me whether we had the capability to confront China militarily. Certainly not. But I said that they should never underestimate the will of the Filipino people. And so we must achieve that national will to stand up for our rights. The third challenge is continuity of policy and strategy over a long period of time. Note that strategy is inherently long-term. It's not even medium-term. And so it is important that we have continuity of policy over a long time. So those are some of the challenges we face. Among the several challenges that we face, I just highlighted 3. Now, what about opportunities? Certainly, there's an opportunity for a complementary economic component of the alliance, possibly an enhanced economic cooperation also. And a few hours ago, in Washington, they were already talking about the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement. And that is an opportunity that we can exploit. But Brett here can talk more about that later, perhaps. So that's an opportunity. Note that with a more robust economy, we can afford more defense spending. It certainly contributes also to our deterrent posture. We can be a more responsible ally as well. So that is the importance of the economy, to be able to sustain our capability upgrade. We need a stronger economy, sustain over the long term, even if we get modern weapon systems now, but if we are not able to sustain that over the long term, then that's useless. And so we need a more robust economy to do that. And certainly we need help in that respect to be a more responsible ally, to be a more capable ally. Now, there is also an opportunity for multilateral support. Note that we won the case in The Hague, and certainly we stand on moral high ground. And now we have demonstrated the will to stand up for those rights. And we hope we can leverage on that capital to achieve multilateral support from other potential allies from ASEAN and the rest of the international community, international organizations. And thirdly, there is also an opportunity to dialogue with China, but now not from a position of a weakling, at least from a position of a co-equal, not subservient, and now willing to stand up for our sovereignty and sovereign rights. And with that, let me just conclude by saying that EDCA is in our national interest. And even as I am retired now, I still stand up for EDCA, for our national interest. Thank you, and good morning to all of you.
Thank you very much, General Bautista, for that comprehensive discussion and enlightenment about the EDCA, for telling us the context and subtext about the creation of the EDCA. There are layers of conversations that we can gather from your talk. Later, we'll be discussing that during the open forum. And of course, the possibilities, given that you mentioned also some strengths and weaknesses of the EDCA and quite opportunities also. Okay, for the next speaker, he'll be discussing about the topic on enhancing maritime security cooperation within the Philippines-U.S. alliance. He is the political counselor of the U.S. Embassy in the Philippines. He previously served as the Director of Multilateral Affairs, East Asian and Pacific Bureau at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. He also previously served as political counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi from 2016 to 2018 and as regional unit chief of the political section at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing from 2011 to 2014. He has been a foreign service officer since 1998 and has been assigned to posts in Japan, New York, and Thailand. To share his view on enhancing maritime security cooperation within the Philippines and U.S. alliance, let's all welcome Mr. Brett Blackshaw. Sir.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chester. Thank you, Dindo. I'm very pleased to be here. One obvious reason, we have just welcomed Philippine President Marcos to the White House. It's the first visit of a Philippine president in quite some time, and it's about time. And from all I hear, though I'm hoping ASEC JV joins us and gives us a live update, it all sounds like it's going very well. But I'm also pleased, if I could return to what Dindo said, I'm pleased to be here to also just pay tribute to a great man. This is the ADRi Institute, and I want to take a moment to honor the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Del Rosario. He was a true Filipino patriot, and that's in a country that has produced many an impressive patriot. He had the courage to stand up for the country's national interest and for what is right. And the victory that he did so much to achieve is powerful, it's enduring, and it cannot be erased by any level of propaganda. And just, on a personal level, as a diplomat, the image of many of us diplomats, and I know there's a few of you in this room, is people who are cautious, who can give you 5 clever reasons why something is a bad idea. But Secretary Del Rosario showed that diplomats can be bold and can dare to champion what's right, even in the face of great pressure. And he's a diplomat that I personally respect. He's among the diplomats I respect the most. So gone, but not forgotten. Let me turn to the topic at hand. So I'm going to talk about sort of maritime, U.S.-Philippine maritime cooperation in the context of our alliance. But I think it's useful to take a step back and reflect. I'm approaching the close of my 3-year tour here, and it's been quite a story arc, as they say in Hollywood. Together, I think we have come a long way since the days when the Visiting Forces Agreement was under order of termination. In the past 9 months especially, under the leadership of President Marcos, we have reinvigorated bilateral engagement in many ways. President obviously is in, and much of the Philippine cabinet is currently in Washington. This is just the start of a multi-day visit. We've had a whole series of other high-level visitors from the United States come here. Vice President, Secretaries of State, Defense, the commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific was just here. So there is a lot of energy back in this relationship, in this alliance. I would say that, if you look at the grand sweep of our alliance partnership together, we've been through a lot. There are ups as well as downs, and when it comes under stress, the important thing is that we learn from it. And I personally, I feel that we have done so, because I think on the US side, I can assure you the underpinning of our approach is this mantra that we repeat a lot now. The United States values the Philippines as an equal sovereign partner. That has been the starting point for our approach to reviving this alliance and all that we have achieved in partnership, especially in these past 9 months. So that has meant a renewed focus on standing in support of the Philippines as you uphold your own sovereign rights, as you defend your territory, and defend international law. I would say also that you can look at, so the White House visit, as I said, is ongoing, but they just put out a joint statement, joint leaders statement, and a big long fact sheet that lists all sorts of things, including new developments in the alliance. And at the top it says, it uses the word special. Sure, it's a word, but it tells you a lot, I think, about the bond between the United States and the Philippines, and certainly our perspective from Washington. You are not just an important partner in Southeast Asia, you are an ally. And that word in our foreign policy is sacrosanct. So I know, there are at times questions about, does the U.S. walk the walk as well as talk the talk about our alliance commitments? But I think you can take some comfort from that means a lot from the U.S. perspective. So our alliance and our approach on the maritime aspects of our cooperation has evolved. And to use a phrase that the President Marcos has used about the alliance, it is evolving. It's evolving to meet shared challenges. It's evolving in how the alliance is managed. We have more alliance to manage now. So that means we have been strengthening the institutional framework of our partnership. You can see that with a revived 2+2 process, revived dialogues at other levels as well. It means setting updated priorities and boosting our capabilities. One thing that will come out of this visit and is on track to be made public on Wednesday when President Marcos visits the Pentagon is the first ever bilateral defense guidelines will be issued between the United States and the Philippines. And those we have with other major allies, with Japan, for example. And they are an important, it's a policy document, but it's an important way that allies can articulate, why do we have this alliance today and looking ahead to the future? What are our shared priorities and how do we envision partnering together to meet them? So turning a bit more specifically to maritime, a lot of our focus within the alliance on maritime cooperation is in ensuring that you, the Philippines, have a credible deterrent in order to uphold and defend your sovereign rights. The past shows us appeasement doesn't work. It's important to show confidence and to develop the capabilities to stand up for what are your lawful rights. And that's why having allies and friends matters so much, as the General made reference to. deterrence is not about provoking conflict, it's about preventing it. And that means specifically EDCA. That is an important way that both our forces increase their interoperability and training and exercise together, to enable the Philippines and our alliance in partnership to be able to respond in any kind of crisis and to uphold our obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty. It means exercises, and you've all seen in the papers, so some of you might have attended parts of Balikatan. It means activities together in the West Philippine Sea. I know that often in public the phrase joint patrols is used. We don't really use that on the US side. We talk about combined maritime activities, which covers the whole broad range of doing stuff together in the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea. And that's not only, the value there is it shows the Philippines has partners and friends who support your lawful rights, lawful sovereign rights. Doesn't have to be just with the United States. We're happy to, we want to be there as your ally, but Philippines has a lot of friends and partners. And we're very pleased to see those relationships develop. It also means equipment. And in the 2+2, which seems like it happened yesterday, we agreed to work on a 5 to 10 year roadmap on security assistance. And that's both to link what we help provide to the AFP's own military modernization priorities, and also to link it more closely to shared policy objectives within the alliance. It also means transparency. And I think others mentioned this, but the Philippines has set an example for many in this region in having the courage to shine a light on incidents of harassment and pressure tactics. And that you don't have to build a ship to do that. It doesn't cost much, but it does require a bit of political will. And the Philippines has impressively shown you have that in spades. It's had an effect. You've all seen the incidents of this in the papers, partly because the Philippine government is basically shining a light on what is actually happening, the truth. There's the laser incident. There's another, obviously, the recent incident at Ayungin, Second Thomas Shoal, the near collision. It's worth just reiterating that under the arbitral tribunal ruling that Secretary Del Rosario did so much to achieve, and under US policy, our view is that Ayungin, Second Thomas Shoal, falls fully under Philippine sovereignty and jurisdiction, and that the PRC has no lawful territorial or maritime claim there. The joint statement from the presidential visit has a lot of good language in there about our alliance, about our maritime cooperation. So does the fact sheet. Do I have them all memorized yet? So they just came out this morning. I'm not going to answer that. But I think we can. This is a real milestone as we look back on how far we've come in this alliance, in our cooperation on maritime security within the alliance. And I, for one, take a lot of confidence from that. I think we, as partners, can as well. And many in this room have contributed to that level of progress. So there's a lot to do still. But perhaps I can stop there, and I'd be happy to take part in the discussion to come. And I can't wait for JV to join us. He's the one who coined the phrase that our alliance is in hyperdrive. So that's probably what's distracting him. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brett Blackshaw, for that honest and, of course, comprehensive discussion about the alliance of the Philippines and the U.S. It's very, how would I say it? Thank you for telling about the sanctity of our alliance and for discussing about the value of many things. Later on, you might be asking questions later on the guidelines of the defense partnership and some other matters which we'll be discussing during the open forum. Our third speaker is a distinguished full professor at the De La Salle University, Manila, and member of the Board of Trustees of the ADRi. He specializes in the fields of international security, Philippine foreign policy, and foreign policy analysis, among others. He delivers several professional courses on international relations and strategic and security studies in various institutions. To discuss the Philippine foreign policy, fostering alliances and partnerships with like-minded states, let's all welcome Dr. Renato de Castro.
I have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'll try to be very fast about it. So again, it's a great honor to be given a chance to talk about one of the two most important legacies of the late Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Albert del Rosario. And that, of course, aside from the arbitral ruling, was, of course, the signing of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement that was signed just a few hours before the arrival of then President Barack Obama on April 28, 2014. So my presentation is not actually new because I did this presentation last year after, of course, you have the incoming president, and the armed forces of the Philippines was very much apprehensive whether this new president would basically continue the modernization program of the armed forces of the Philippines. So I did this presentation, but of course, adjusting to the recent context. And of course, as mentioned earlier, and this is something that my presentation will try to do, when the modernization program came out in 1996, this was, of course, a view that it is separate from the alliance. This was, of course, a reaction after the Philippine Senate did not ratify or concur through the Philippine-American Cooperation Treaty. So we don't have any more that alliance, so we shift into the modernization program, which is an attempt for autonomous defense because we have to move away from the alliance. But what's basically happening right now, and something we'll argue, the situation provides for a historic convergence between this modernization program and, of course, the alliance. So let me proceed. Okay, so of course, when it came out in 1996 as a law, the purpose was, of course, we don't have the alliance, so let's look at, autonomous defense. But what has been forgotten, of course, that it's a defense planning. It's all about preparation for the security of the Philippines in future war, given the fact that we asked the Americans in 1991 that it's time to move on. We will not anymore rely on the alliance. Working? So defense planning, all shapes, should be central concern to key decision makers because, of course, intensely highly political for two reasons. Again, when we talk about the modernization. Number one, it's a function of security. It is the responsibility of the government to defend. Not alliance, it's just a matter of convenience. But at the end of the day, it's a responsibility of the government, the responsibility of every Filipino to look at, of course, alliance, but of course, taking into account, and raised earlier by General Bautista, limited resources. All countries, of course, face limited resources. It's a matter of course, how you harness those resources. Obvious fact that the future, of course, is simply either reliably known. Of course, when the modernization program came out, China just occupied Mischief Reef. China just built some structures that will house fishermen. Tell it to the Marines, at that time. But that was, of course, the assumption. Just shelter for fishermen. So China will never threaten us. That was the perception then. But of course, things have changed. Okay? Given decision makers usually ignore anything about the future, they need to answer the following key questions. Just breeze through this. Of course, when you talk about defense planning, so what weapons to buy, how much to buy, when it's too much. Develop, of course, in the case of countries, I think there was a time in the United States, immediately after the end of the Cold War, defense planning was based on budget. How much money can you spend? Of course, that was a reality then. But in the case of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Program, that has always been the priority. How much money? And of course, given the fact that it was driven primarily by legislators. Legislators try to control it. Capability-driven approach, of course, involves articulating the effects of armed forces need to achieve capabilities necessary. So you have to plan not in terms of what money you have, but what is happening out there. That's the reality. You can't just acquire this weapon system and realize that it's simply inadequate or simply will not work when you're confronted with challenges out there. So the main challenge, of course, in a capacity, and this is, of course, my advocacy regarding the modernization program, we have to look in terms of capacity driven, not simply budget or by legislator, who of course have a different concern. Force modernization, identify, formulate solution for the requirements of national defense, adequate enough to address essential threats that you simply don't know what would happen in the future. Of course, some of the concerns, I'll just breeze through them. There are priorities, of course, to implement, uncertainties that you face. What's wrong with this? Made in China. Polity-owned political economic demands. Strategic choices by polities given your challenge. What's basically the capability that your opponent has out there, and of course, more importantly, not just capabilities, intention. So of course, General Bautista mentioned it. And this became very apparent in 2012 during the Scarborough Shoal. Most relevant geographic context of the conflict. What will be the nature of conflict in the West Philippine Sea, and of course, just in case you have a push comes to shove in Taiwan. It will be primarily maritime in nature. And of course, when maritime, it will occupy a lot of space and highly technologically driven. So quality of combat, I'll just breeze through this. Of course, dynamics, particular conflict. Again, it's maritime dimension. So capability-driven force modernization is all about successful acquisition of military material that is focused on the development of necessary capabilities, not simply on the basis of the money or legislators are willing to allocate for you. Reflecting the fact that specification requirements should be located within a strategic framework of agreed defense policy, and this is something we have to take into account, grand strategy or a national security strategy. Requirement, of course, the role of defense capability in promoting national security. So current developments such as the revitalization of the Philippine-US alliance, thank you very much again. We have no one to praise but China for pushing us back into the alliance. As mentioned by the former National Security Advisor, it's China that pushed us into the alliance. President Bongbong Marcos' directive to shift the armed forces of the Philippines away from internal security to territorial defense. And of course, China's intensifying aggression in the South China Sea and against Taiwan have, of course, implication on the modernization program. These developments allow the Philippine government and the AFP to leverage the alliance, linked with the alliance, with, of course, the modernization program of the Armed Forces of the Philippines to transform it from a budget-driven modernization program to a capability-driven force modernization. I'll just breeze through this. So let's just go into the history. I won't discuss this in detail. So it said a legislation attempted in 1996. Nothing happened so much. Let's just breeze through this. So this is the law that provides for modernization, which of course provides Congress the ability to dictate how much money should be used to the modernization. I will not have to go to the details on what happened during the Ramos administration. Oh, the late Ramos, President Ramos. Let's just freeze, of course. It's primarily driven by the Senate the senators during the time, especially of Senator Orly Mercado. Program was adversely affected what happened in the 1990s. Then, of course, suddenly you have that attempt to revive the modernization program after nothing was actually accomplished in the first 15 years. Shift, of course, but again, despite efforts to modernize, no money was simply enough during the time of the Aquino administration. Again, sense of urgency, you have competing demand, and of course, I will have to discuss the context of the security. EDCA, of course, is part of the effort to boost the modernization program given the fact that you simply don't have enough resource at that time. Let's just move. I won't have to discuss in detail what is EDCA all about. We can discuss it later. Okay, you go to the Duterte administration. The Duterte administration decided to continue the modernization program, but without any assistance from the United States, without acquiring any weapon system from the United States. And of course, that was his personal bias against the United States to continue the autonomous defense program. So significantly, of course, you have acquisition, the money. He decided even to bankroll the third phase of the modernization program. Big items that would require, of course, lion's share, 56 billion going to the Philippine Navy and Philippine Air Force. This, of course, the acquisition made. You know, we have to pat the Duterte administration on the back, the fact that for the first time we were able to acquire at least a squadron of F-A-50s and finally 2 brand new guided missile frigates from South Korea. But of course, you have a lot of problems there, right? You have to acquire the platform without the weapon system. And of course, you acquire those aircraft without any hangars. You know, you cannot expose those F-A-50s from the elements of, you know, of the weather. So consequences, I'll just breeze through this. Allocation of a very legalistic, tedious process. Modernization simply, and this is the argument, this is not really a modernization, simply to compensate the fact that a large portion of the budget went actually to the Army. And just to equalize the portion that was, of course, needed for the Navy and the Air Force, you have a separate budget. But still, in that separate budget, the Army still got its lion's share, much to the dismay of the Philippine Air Force and, of course, the Navy. Observed strategy base is lacking in the implementation. This is from several studies conducted in the National Defense College. The modernization program is driven primarily by budget or simply to please the services of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. It's not, and of course, priority has always been internal. I'll just breeze through these. I don't have a lot of time. So overall picture, we can discuss this later. Stated goal, the allocation of shows the priority is still geared toward internal security. As for all, of course, the Philippine Army absorbed most of the money. Okay, I'll just breeze through this. So this is, of course, just breeze through the revitalization of the alliance. Now we go. I'll try to reach my conclusion as soon as possible. Of course, I don't have to discuss it, what happened in the past. Of course, EDCA, second visit, and a possible situation where, of course, EDCA would be utilized aside from humanitarian assistance risk reduction. Okay, I'll just have to breeze through this. Have intensified expansion, thrive, will have. We can discuss this later, possible how EDCA would basically affect the alliance, increase training for the U.S. Armed Forces, of course, giving them a feel of the tropical Southeast Asian environment, act as forward facilities for the United States Navy and Marine, especially those, of course, in the north. And of course, hopefully, this will not happen. You'll have providing launching punch. But of course, all of this would happen if there's, of course, consent of approval from the Philippine government. They are not American bases. They're still, of course, under the jurisdiction of a Filipino commander. Just to have the fact that this is a reality face. Why do we have EDCA? It's, of course, a Taiwan Strait issue. Mentioned earlier. So aware that armed conflict erupts and that there's a country will escape primarily, of course, of our geography, the fact that we have 200,000 Filipino OFWs in Taiwan, and the fact that we cannot afford a credible or armed neutrality because simply we're not armed. And of course, we have to take into account we have a mutual defense treaty with the United States. You expect assistance from your ally would also expect assistance from you. Alliance is a two-way street. Okay, Marcus and Pounded proof, of course. Just breeze through this. Explicitly would not assist in our conflict in the case of Taiwan. Again, of course, part of this balancing act. But in its very cryptic statement, when he said this, when we look at Taiwan from his province, Ilocos Norte, he could not help but see that very strategic southern port city of Kaohsiung. Of course, push comes to shove, the first port that Chinese forces would probably capture would be Kaohsiung. So, and it's not very far from, of course, Batanes and northern Luzon. So going out into the role of the alliance, I'll just go straight into my general recommendation. Okay, so what's my basic recommendation? There's a need, of course, to rethink the force modernization to ensure the AFP. It's not simply a matter of shifting to maritime security or, of course, air. It's a tri-service. The Army would still have a role in terms of course, protecting the coast and land area, equipped, of course, to address long-term external from, of course, hidden fog of peace. Hopefully, that fog of peace would last a bit longer, hopefully. So, the course, it should be geared for the development of the PN's limited sea denial power projection enhanced by the development of the Philippine Air Force and Philippine Army, not for, again, simply maritime, but for joint operation support. Okay, some of the recommendations. So, what are my key recommendations? Number one, of course, is a formulation of a national security policy and strategy addressing the pressing security challenges in the West Philippine Sea and Taiwan, that we have a threat out there, and the need to link our modernization program with the alliance. This is not unique. This is a case with Japan. This is a case with South Korea. Most NATO countries link whatever national force modernization they have with the alliance. Force modernization is not seen as separate, but primarily linked with the alliance. A classic example will always be Japan, especially during time of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. I'll try to breeze through. Okay, strengthening, okay. Going back. So when the armed forces, again, just before that, get a very good, important. Okay, repeal Act, the modernization bill. Instead, pass a law or policy guideline that requires the Philippine government to increase defense budget to 2%, following the footstep, of course, of Japan. And much more in the case of the Philippines, we need really to build up the armed forces of the Philippines. And it's not the responsibility of our ally to pay for it. It's a responsibility of every Filipino. And it's linked, of course, that we can only do it if we effect economic growth and development. So my proposal is repeal the modernization law and simply, of course, increase the defense budget of the armed forces of the Philippines to 2% of the gross domestic product. We cannot go back to the situation when the bases were here, when we asked every year for the foreign military sales credit and economic support fund. We have to put our money where our mouth is. Of course, we have to shift the armed forces of the Philippines away from internal security to external defense. The armed forces of the Philippines cannot be a dignified constabulary forever. It has to assume its responsibility as provided by the Constitution. Defense of the territory, of course, also based on the the directive given by the President that we have to focus on territorial defense. Strengthening, of course, the Philippine-U.S. alliance. I think it's being done full implementation EDCA, expansion of EDCA. I think this is already being conducted or implemented. Enhancing Philippine security partnership, modernizing the alliance by linking it with other alliances, other U.S. bilateral alliances in the region. More significantly, of course, with the U.S.-Japan security relations, with Australia, and of course, South Korea. And ties with, of course, emerging minilaterals, Quad and AUKUS. Formulate a medium-term policy guideline that will link the AP's modernization program. I think this is already on the grapevine. You know, it's already in the, it's mentioned in the statement with the defense policies of the country's formal treaty ally and security partners, namely Japan, the Republic of Korea, and of course Australia. Link them. We cannot do, modernization program autonomously or isolated from the policy, of course, of our ally and our, other like-minded countries and security partners. I'm nearing, don't worry. Okay. This will open, of course, the Philippine military to various material, technical, ideational benefits, allowing it to develop interoperability with its ally and partners' defense system and capabilities. Thank you very much for your attention and bearing with me. Have a great morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Renato de Castro, for discussing with us the evolution of Philippine foreign policy and pointing to us good recommendations on this alliance. Now, we're down to the last two speakers. The next speaker is the former Director for Strategic Plans and Policy of the United States Indo-PACOM or Indo-Pacific Command. His previous designation also includes Commanding General, Marine Corps Installations Command based in Okinawa, Japan. Currently, he is the Senior Fellow at the Center of Naval Analysis and Consultant for the Institute for Defense Analysis, joining us via Zoom to discuss his views on leveraging Indo-Pacific cooperation for a rules-based international order. Let's all welcome Major General Joaquin F. Malabe of USMC, retired. Thank you.
Well, aloha from Hawaii. I hope that you can all hear me. The audio was intermittent, but I think I grasped the major portions of the previous speakers. Can you all hear me at this point?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Okay. I think I heard you say, yes, you can hear me. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Please proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that. Well, first and foremost, thank you very, very much for this opportunity. It is a great honor and a very distinct pleasure to be here with you all. I wish I was in Manila. I'm actually in Hawaii and really just completed a conference with my very, very good friend, my warrior brother, Rusty Padilla, talking particularly about EDCA and the Republic of the Philippines and our alliance. I thought I would also add to the previous comments and show a great deal of respect and offer from the Malabe family our deepest sympathies and condolences for your loss of Secretary Albert Del Rosario. I did consider him a friend, having conceived of the idea of EDCA in 2012. I was given permission to introduce it to Secretary Del Rosario with a private meeting hosted by then Ambassador Phil Goldberg. And as you can all imagine, after presenting the idea, Secretary Del Rosario immediately grasped the grand strategic importance of it. And with the full support of Secretary Gazmin, then the Secretary of National Defense, we received approval in 2012 to start negotiations. and I share our deepest sympathies for his loss. I will also share that his legacy and spirit of statesmanship will certainly endure and thread through the U.S.-Philippine alliance for many, many decades to come. I thought I would do something different. I don't have a set of slides, but I thought I would offer a story with perhaps three parts. A story about family and people-to-people ties, the backstory of EDCA and some of the nuances, and then proceeding into what I believe to be the next EDCA and how we might be able to leverage partnerships with collectivism and cooperation to fill out not only the grand strategic design of the Indo-Pacific, a free and open Indo-Pacific, but to deepen and broaden the U.S.-Philippine alliance and then add to the connectedness of the other alliances across the theater to include South Korea and Japan and Thailand and certainly Australia. So I thought from a personal perspective, I would share, and many of you know this, and I have to reflect that this month, 32 years ago, I was married in the Republic of the Philippines. My wife, Rose, whose father fought alongside U.S. servicemen in World War II and was a Philippine policeman in Angeles City, Pampanga area, and I were married on May 11th, 1991. I returned to Hawaii where I was stationed, and sure enough, Mount Pinatubo blew up, and Rose was, with the help of the armed forces of the Philippines and the U.S. military, evacuated in 1991 aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, some time in Cebu, a flight to Guam, and then a flight to Honolulu, all because of the spirit of cooperation with the U.S. and the Philippine armed forces. And I will have to tell you, two nations coming together to bring a young couple together in 1991 off of a natural disaster is something that threads through my heart and my soul. And I share that with you because we are very, very proud of our two beautiful daughters, Kayla, who is here in Hawaii, and who 2 years ago was Miss Honolulu and competed with the Miss Hawaii contest. And our eldest daughter, Layla, who resides in New Jersey and who married one of the finest young men I have ever met, Neil Garg. Neil Garg's parents were born in India. His father's electrical engineer, worked for AT&T, and his mother is a teacher. And Neil works for Block and Layla for White and Case in New York City. I share that with you because we have a grandson, Everest Kai Garg. And I will share with you that the Garg and Malabe families with roots and cultural heritage and relationships from India, the Philippines, certainly Hawaii, and into the mainland are truly Indo-Pacific families. And that's important because we all have our family stories and our professional histories. And I share that with you with some humility, but to also let you know that for the Malabe family, this business of national security, and in my career, has always been both personal and professional. I'd like to, and I have to share that General Bautista and I have been in several different forums together, and I'm always learning from him. The classic military statesman, the classic student of history. And I don't think I've heard a more compelling and detailed characterization of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement than what he presented earlier in the panel discussions. I'd like to add a few points, though, to it that will perhaps offer and illuminate why EDCA was initiated to solve certain challenges and problems, but also to seize opportunities. And very, very briefly, as a young general joining the OSD policy team as a principal director and then deputy assistant secretary of defense for policy in OSD in 2012, we recognized that we could do much more with regard to our defense cooperation and relationship with the Philippines, and principally to help them modernize and be prepared at certain facilities and locations well in advance of the armed forces of the Philippines receiving modern high-tech weapon systems. So the idea of EDCA wanted to capture all of our training and exercise-related activities in the Philippines, but purpose it in discrete locations. And in so doing, unlock overseas construction funds, congressionally mandated and appropriated congressional funds to fill out what I would call the command and control, the intelligence, the logistics, the maneuver elements, the force protection elements, the fires, and the other elements of military strategy that would help the armed forces of the Philippines be prepared so that when they did receive high-tech modern weapon systems, that those areas and their bases and their facilities would be guided and constructed and improved over time. And beyond that piece, and I think it's been articulated, quite frankly, in the 2+2 and in the recent statement by our presidents, was this unique and special vision. And I used to describe this unique and special vision for EDCA when I hosted senior dignitaries in my office as the J5 Director of Plans and Policy at Indo-Pacific. And outside my window, you can see Pearl Harbor and Hickam Air Force Base. And I used to tell the story that if you could imagine 100 years ago and you look down at those sites, you would see the geography that was ideal for a port and the geography ideal for runways. But what you perhaps might not have seen is the thriving communities in and around these U.S. military bases. The idea for EDCA was to also include significant U.S. business investment to fill out in and around the EDCA sites thriving communities that would focus on energy, electricity, water, businesses like agriculture, manufacturing in the future, so that at some point, each one of the EDCA sites would slowly and systematically be invested in with both U.S. funds and Philippine funds to arrive at the thriving communities that I was showing people that are now Pearl Harbor and Hickam. And I share that with you because that vision is yet to be fully fulfilled, where you have true public-private partnerships for the benefit of the Republic of the Philippines, guided, envisioned, and blueprinted, first and foremost, for what the armed forces of the Philippines needs, with mutual respect, mutual benefit, and have them guide us into how they are going to improve and modernize to fulfill their mandate for territorial defense. Thus the story of EDCA. And I think going forward, recognizing 2 years of negotiations and the friendships that we were able to make in 2012 and 2014, and the closeness of understanding each other's perspectives with regard to the alliance structure and the art of the possible, is the true benefit of EDCA was the discussion that it catalyzed, and then the public-private partnership opportunities that I think are very important to the future of it. Thirdly, and continuing the story, I'd like to offer a framework for why it is so important beyond EDCA and our partnerships with both allies across the region and others who are committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And I think with true transparency and honesty, we have to be mindful of the threat. And General Bautista talked about it in his remarks, and as well, Brett talked about the impetus for the 2+2 in the recent meetings of our president, and was also touched on by Dr. Castro in a way that I think brought that out in a powerful, meaningful blueprint. And I'd like to offer some words written by a very dear friend and former National Security Council individual on what the threat is that we're trying to address. And I will do this in a way that will lead into how we might leverage Indo-Pacific cooperation for a rules-based international order. But the principal threat to a rules-based international order and the principal threat to a free, open Indo-Pacific and the principal threat to the Republic of the Philippines' sovereignty and territorial integrity is China, is the Chinese Communist Party. So let me read a brief statement that characterizes that threat in grand strategic terms. And China's strategy, understanding it, its character, its nature, and its intent is important before we are able to build the fabric and the frameworks underneath our mutual defense treaty that will be substantial in addressing that threat. So China aims to weaken and eventually dissolve U.S. alliances and partnerships across the Indo-Pacific, and quite frankly, globally. It aims to dislodge the United States from the Western Pacific, and then to establish itself as a preeminent regional power. China seeks to create a sphere of influence that almost unconsciously reorders the Indo-Pacific and Asia into a Sino-centric hierarchy. General Secretary Xi refers to this as Asians for Asians. And Beijing aims to expand its influence globally, often undermining countries' confidence in democracy. The Chinese Communist Party starts by influencing and co-opting elites within targeted nations, and then seeks to shape popular opinion in ways that support China's strategic aims and goals. It uses political warfare and debt diplomacy, typified by its signature One Belt, One Road initiative, to weaken good economic governance and to fuel corruption and dependency. Corruption spreads authoritarianism, and authoritarianism helps China spread its influence. So even if China isn't exporting communism, as it attempted to do under Mao, you could say that China is seeking to make the world safe for authoritarianism. For example, in Africa, Beijing's strategy is modeled on the European colonial model of the 1800s. So in political terms, and many recognize this and are starting to speak about it in transparent and open ways with bold, courageous intent, China is perhaps building a bridge to the 19th century. That's not the future. And I share that with you because the 2+2 language, as Brett alluded to, and the recent statement by our presidents speaks to not only the threat or the problem we're trying to solve, but the opportunity. And I'll just read from you additional elements that underscore that before I talk about new and emerging partnerships that we could leverage. In the 2+2, underline strong objections to the unlawful maritime claims, militarization of reclaimed features, and threatening and provocative activities in the South China Sea, including the recent attempts by the People's Republic of China to disrupt Philippines' lawful operations at and around Second Shoal, and repeated massing of PRC maritime militia vessels at several sites within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, including, but not limited to, maritime areas in the vicinity of Iroquois Reef, Sabina Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, Winson Reef. Such activities also interfere with the livelihoods rights of fisherfolk and undermine Philippine food security. I would add energy security to that. Secondly, our leaders called on the PRC to fully comply with the final and legally binding 2016 arbitral award on the South China Sea. The award, which was constituted under the 1982 Law of the Sea and Law of the Sea Convention, is final and legally binding on the parties and validates the Philippines' sovereign rights and jurisdiction with respect to its EEZ and continental shelf, including maritime areas in the vicinity of Reed Bank, Mischief Bank, or Mischief Reef, Second Thomas Shoal, and other Philippine-owned maritime features. A very strong statement and reflects, as we all acknowledge, the vision, the courage, and the bold approach as a statesman that Secretary Albert del Rosario brought forward. Okay, very quickly, but in closing, what we're seeing beyond the traditional U.S. alliances with South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Thailand, and Australia is what I would call additional quads and triads. You're all familiar with the India, Japan, US, Australia quad, that serves to bring together national security elements, not just forces on the sea or in the air, but elements to reinforce a free and open Indo-Pacific. The triad of the US, Japan, Philippines actually started at Indo-PACOM with a very quiet trilateral J5 plans and strategy cooperation between then Major General Rusty Padilla, Major General, now Lieutenant General Kajiwara in Japan, and myself, just to flesh out what that would mean with three nations coming together with military strategic designs for mutual support and cooperation. The US, Australia, Philippines partnership and triad is very important. An interesting relationship that I discovered when I visited Vietnam and had the occasion to be hosted by the Indian ambassador in Vietnam, who over a 2-hour private meeting described that the Indian, Vietnamese, Japan relationship was very, very strong and emerging. And that, in his words, the sky was blue. The Australian, UK, US relationship with nuclear-powered submarines and all of its intentions speaks to new collaborations along bold lines. South Korea and Japan and Vietnam working together through ASEAN, and the area and geography of the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, and the areas of northern Luzon are all important. So nations, allies, partners beyond the US framework are coming together, some open and some quietly, to reassure each other and also mindful of what is happening to the Republic of the Philippines and the West Philippine Sea, and are doing their part to strengthen and deepen the idea of the noble cause of a free and open Indo-Pacific in ways that buttress the things that the Republic of the Philippines and the US are doing, certainly for EDCA and beyond. Lastly, we will deepen and broaden with the convergence of national interests with democratic societies and free people, with mutual respect, mutual support, and mutual benefit, the intersection of our national interests, our security interests, and our values, and more concretely across the economic, energy, security, technology nexus. In many ways, we might be closer to 1939 than 2049. And in a sense, the past is prologue. and with the past as a guide, we can do things now to prevent what happened just after 1939, and collectively and cooperatively re-blueprint our alliances, our partnerships in the framework of agreements like we did in 2012 with EDCA, with fresh ideas to maintain the moral, legal, and strategic high ground as hierarchy representing our values, certainly with the US and Philippine alliance, and operationalize the Mutual Defense Treaty, the VFA, and EDCA so that it can be replicated and modeled with mutual respect and strategic designs amongst nations across the Indo-Pacific. And as an example to the rest of the world, what can be done with nation states that believe in freedom, that believe in human rights, and are willing to take bold and courageous action, like Albert del Rosario, the secretary, brought forth the significant UN arbitration ruling that has set the stage for deepened and broadened cooperation for mutual national security interests. Thank you. I look forward to your questions. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Major General Joaquin Malabe, for um, your backstory on the Indo-Pacific and also about the quads and the triads, which we will be discussing later on during the open forum. The last speaker is a distinguished female speaker. He is a professor at the Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. She has held appointments at the University of Denver and Colorado School of Mines and served as exchange faculty for the University of Colorado in Beijing, China, as well as consultant on issues pertaining to water security, science, technology, security, Southeast Asia, and the Philippines. Joining us via Zoom to discuss modernizing defense capabilities to secure territorial integrity. Let's all welcome Dr. Virginia Bakay-Watson. Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson, it's your turn now. I think you're still muted. We cannot hear you. Um, okay, maybe Dr. Watson. Okay, she's still having some.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Watson, please proceed
Hello.
with your presentation. Yeah, we can hear you. Oh, right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes,
Yes?
Dr. Watson.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
I just had to reboot. First of all, I said good morning, aloha, like General Malavet said, aloha from Honolulu as well, sir. And the first stuff I'd like to thank, of course, Professor Manhit and Dr. Renato de Castro for extending the invitation and to participate in this August event. My perspective is a little different, but in a way, same. My argument actually puts the whole discussion of Philippine defense capabilities in the maritime domain in terms of arguing that the challenges and the threats today that the Philippines faces to modernize its capabilities is first it needs a reconceptualization of defense modernization. And this is what I mean by this is that given the Philippines' strategic location, its ongoing territorial disputes in the West Philippine Sea, Southeast Asia as a site for increasing cybercrimes, non-traditional transnational maritime crimes, and gray zone operations in the oceans. One way to reconceptualize defense modernization is to use the maritime identity of the country as the organizing principle of defense strategy that will cover both traditional and non-traditional security interests. While the country is acknowledged as a maritime state, the maritime narrative has remained in the background and is yet to be utilized as a national strategic framework to guide defense developments and formulate strategies. And I say that there are three reasons that lends credence to adapting a maritime frame in defense modernization, explicitly adapting a maritime frame. And the first, doing so provides the doctrinal underpinning of a national strategy that would guide, identify, and justify defense priorities and strategic objectives. For example, developing naval air capabilities as a major recipients of defense forces, force structure adjustments, defining multi-domain cooperation and collaboration, and the mitigation of strategic and escalatory risks, among others. The maritime paradigm will serve as a conceptual guardrail that ensures modernization efforts align with defense strategy. Second, institutionalizing the maritime character of the archipelago aligns the Philippines' defense strategy closer, and this has been mentioned by all speakers before me. It aligns the strategy closer to that of key partners and friends, creating timely opportunities for enhanced collaboration and cooperation. It provides us an accelerant to technological development for the Philippines. Major Malabe noted that as well. And I cite a few examples in this respect. Australia's recent strategic reposture is, for example, giving more prominence to naval defenses, hardening its northern ports and bases, and redefining the role of Army as it becomes more focused on land to maritime capability, including through long-range strike power, simultaneously and significantly reducing planned projects for infantry vehicles. So that's one example. Another is just last week, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida unveiled a new basic plan on ocean policy, a 5-year policy that calls for a stronger maritime security to include strengthening the Japanese Coast Guard capability and cooperation with the military. The plan also includes specific technology projects, such as the development of autonomous underwater vehicles. One can argue that the Australian and Japanese initiatives, and by the way, the Korean midterm plan is also strikes the same chord in that respect. Also, very much emphasizing on naval developments and deployments at the same time. The Australian, Japanese, and Korean initiatives, all are treaty allies of the United States, are significant efforts to strengthen at the same time / modernize the U.S. alliance system. The National Defense Strategy of the United States, the National Security Strategy, as well as the Indo-Pacific Strategy, all mention the need to update / modernize the alliance system in the region. This is to bring it up to speed in terms of the new threats in the security environment. So a Philippine strategic reorientation along maritime lines, clearly along maritime lines, establishes strategic coherence with these allies. Although it will have some catching up to do, operating within a maritime construct will provide opportunities to enhance relationship with the United States and other allies, and more importantly, work towards modernizing the alliance system itself. And finally, adopting a maritime perspective provides Philippine defense a framework to know and understand the nexus of issues, as again General Malabe said, that define the Philippines' rights and claims in the West Philippine Sea, and consequently be able to develop strategies that bring a full measure of its capabilities to protect the country's national security interests in the disputed areas. I mention this very importantly because I think, as again, as our diplomat, esteemed diplomat Albert de Rosario said and showed, familiarity with history, the facts and the facts of Philippine naval history and maritime history was very important in making the case of the Philippines at The Hague. Knowing the motorways, the nooks and crannies, knowing the history of which particular islands, very important, I think, to know. At the same time, also, I think um, we are not, I think some of us are not very familiar with the fact that a lot of the Philippine history can be viewed from a maritime perspective. The galleon trade and so forth, 200 years of galleon trade, all were, of course, all maritime based, the trading. Even way back before that, you have the what you call the senior leaders of the Muslim world in the south, the Orang Besar they called it, that looked outwards, not out to Manila, but outwards to the Southeast Asian routes for trading and for to enhance their power, and that preceded the galleon trade. And the final one is I visited, I think about 2 years ago, the Villa Vicencio residence in Taal, Batangas. The Villa Vicencio family played a very important role in the maritime history of the Philippines during the 19th century. They were one of the families that provided a lot of money for the Katipuneros to fight against the Spaniards, and at the same time had some of them, one of them in particular was very talented in shipbuilding. And these kinds of things, I think, are very important. World War II, Battle of Leyte Gulf was also, I believe, one of the largest naval battles in history and was a turning point in the war. So knowing all this full well is really being cognizant of the important role that the maritime domain is in the Philippines, and bringing that only up front in stark relief, whilst against the background of very contemporary issues, is something that I think we need to do, and strengthens our cause to use this narrative and pursue our national security interests. And I won't say much more. So that's just a proposal, a reconsideration of an actual, really a more direct and a more explicit acknowledgement of the maritime history of the Philippines, and then use that as the paradigm that will underpin, policies and strategies, especially defense policies and strategies moving forward. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you very much, Dr. Virginia Watson, for your insights on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. Now we come to the best part of the program. We will be having the open forum. So I would like to ask all the speakers who are present to please come forward. We'll be providing some chairs in front. Mr. Blackshaw, Dr. De Castro, and General Bautista, please come forward. We have also via Zoom Major General Malabe and of course Dr. Watson. Okay, for those who would like to ask questions, please mention your name and the organization you are affiliated. Yes, sir. Please proceed. Yes, sir. Pangalanan, please. Oh, okay.
Hello, good morning. My question, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for General Bautista. Hi, Manny. You mentioned the gray zone operations, and my worry is with the incessant Chinese provocations that at some point it might escalate beyond gray zone provocations, operations, and that the danger is we might end up firing the first shot, in which case they will invoke an Article 2, Paragraph 4 violation of the UN Charter and invoke their right to self-defense under Article 51. Um, my question, General, is what is the range of options that we have in the gray zone? In other words, short of the actual use of force. I mean, the move by Secretary Albert del Rosario to file a case at The Hague was wonderful. It was a stroke of genius, and I think that is what really pisses off the Chinese. But apart from that, oh, by the way, I find their use of those laser guns rather a very creative act of mischief. And I think we should match them in their creativity. And so what other options do we have? Also, General, our filing of protests, of diplomatic protests, you know, the battle of notes verbal, was criticized in the Philippine Senate. So, I mean, what else is left for us to do? My other question, General, is your closing point on political will. You know, when Russia invaded Ukraine, people thought Ukraine would fold within the day. And they're still standing firm today. And what will it take for us to do a Ukraine? In fact, I'll close with this point, General. If you look at our history, when we were invaded by Japan, the Filipinos who collaborated with the Japanese were later on arrested by MacArthur. They were released, they were amnestied, and then they were later hailed as heroes. And these are the famous names in Philippine politics today. Laurel, Recto, Rojas, who became a president. In fact, it is like politically incorrect to remind people about that terrible episode in our past. So, General.
Thank you for those two questions. One on gray zone. I mentioned gray zone in the context of Chinese strategic thinking. Chinese strategic thinking is codified even in the classic writings of Mao Zedong and even Sun Tzu. I was referring to Chinese strategic thinking of employing other means other than military, meaning economic, psychological, informational, etc. Now, the modern nomenclature of those you can see in the concepts of hybrid operation, gray zone, even unrestricted warfare. So I was basically emphasizing that even as we speak, war is being fought in the context of that. Certainly in the information realm, psychological, and other areas. That was the context with which I mentioned gray zone. I did not go into the specifics of actions crossing beyond, beyond gray zone, kinetic military action. So the second point, the political will, I mentioned that as part of the challenge of achieving a national consensus that all of us Filipinos speak as one, advance the Philippine narrative rather than the Chinese narrative. As we have observed, even Filipinos are mouthing the Chinese narrative, and that is akin to what you mentioned on our experience in World War II, and that is a continuing challenge for us to achieve that national consensus, and it takes political will to do that, to get us all together, to speak as one, to act as one, in the context of the whole of nation approach, and hopefully achieve that national consensus, that national will to stand up for our rights, to push back against transgression on Philippine sovereignty and sovereign rights. So those were the contexts by which I articulated those views. Thank you, Raul.
Okay, thank you for that, General Bautista. Okay, maybe a question? Anyone from? Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I'm Ellen Tordesillas at Vera Files. I'd like to ask the three speakers, in a scale of 1 to 10, what's the possibility of, given the situation now, what's the possibility of China attacking Taiwan and taking over Taiwan?
Okay, maybe Dr. De Castro would like to answer that.
I don't think there is a clear-cut answer to that. There is a possibility as to measuring. I'm not going into that estimating. I mean, maybe Brett.
I'm not going to give you a number, but what I can tell you is the number will go down the more credible a deterrent is prevented. I think the goal of, certainly the goal of US policy is to ensure that, you know, when President Xi wakes up in the morning and thinks about what he wants to do that day, he decides it's not a good day to launch any offensive or aggressive action against Taiwan. So that means there has to be a clear deterrent. And how do we get that deterrent? I mean, every ally and partner may approach it in a different way. I think that's certainly been our message to our friends in the region, is that our deterrent is more credible when we are partnered together. And this is not just about developing our military capability, but it's also the messaging. It's messaging directly to Beijing. It's also showing that we are in close coordination and all concerned about the increase in tensions in the Taiwan Straits. If you look at the map of where Chinese aircraft and vessels have been going, there's a lot more been going around the southern part of Taiwan. And it's an ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, is not a territorial airspace, but the ADIZ, the Taiwan ADIZ, is right up against the Philippine ADIZ. So anytime a PLA aircraft goes south of that line, they're entering the Philippine ADIZ. So this stuff is happening not far away. I think at the closest point, I hear different numbers, but it's less than 100 kilometers from the Philippines to Taiwan. So none of us, I think, have a crystal ball. Maybe the professor does. But I would say that the number goes down, the more credible our deterrent, and that deterrent gets stronger the more or the closer we can partner together.
I think being an academic gives you more leeway to speculate. Anyway, I'm not bound. There's no sense of accountability. I have a guess, and that might be 2027. And what's the reason? It's the 100th anniversary of the start of the Chinese Civil War. The anniversary of the split between the Kuomintang and the communists after the Northern Expedition, which led, of course, to the attack by the Kuomintang of the communists in Shanghai. Then, of course, followed by the formation or the creation of the People's Liberation Army, the Red Army in Nanchang. Before they retreated, of course, to Jiangxi, in Jingganshan, in the mountains. So, you have to understand how the Chinese Communist Party thinks. It's, of course, 100 years. The Civil War has been there. So probably it's time for President Xi Jinping, who, of course, wanted to outshine Mao Zedong, because this is something that Mao Zedong failed to do to effect the unification between mainland China and, of course, Taiwan. But, of course, that is simply a timetable. Mounting an amphibious operation, from mainland China to Taiwan will be a more challenging task than what the Allies did in Normandy on June 6, 1944. For one thing, of course, the Germans did not have air control, and of course, they did not control the English Channel. It's a totally different situation now. That's why EDCA comes into picture, it would complicate Chinese planning, especially, of course, when the Chinese would have to conduct this operation, as mentioned by Brett, on the Luzon Strait. We're not concerned primarily, of course, about Taiwan. We're concerned about the Luzon Strait and the Batanes. So again, the timetable might be there. It's our task to complicate that timetable if we do a proactive role. And that is, of course, EDCA, and of course, modernizing the armed forces of the Philippines, and of course, relying on our alliance and our security partnership. So the timetable is there. Whether they can accomplish it or not, of course, is another matter. Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's
I've known Eileen since the 1980s.
one last question for you, ma'am.
Is the possibility of Taiwan, of a Chinese attack on Taiwan higher today than, say, 3 years ago?
Okay, based on the 20th Party Congress, and that's the reason why Secretary General Xi Jinping got his mandate. I think, of course, this is an agreement between him and the Communist Party to finally end the Chinese Civil War. You know, again, looking at the timetable, it's been too long. It's time for them to end it, finally end it, a closure of the long Chinese Civil War. And that will, of course, be exactly 100 years, 2027. Correct. You know, I'm academic, I'm giving more leeway to speculate and to commit mistakes.
Okay, is that related to that question, ma'am? Okay, please go ahead.
Good morning, sir. My name is Karen from Reuters News. I hope you don't mind. I have several questions. First, a follow-up to Ellen's question on the issue of Taiwan. In the event that China does invade Taiwan and the United States decides to respond, does the Philippines have an obligation to support the United States under the MDT? Professor De Castro mentioned that the alliance is mutual. That's my first question. Can I give all the questions? It's okay. My other question is for Mr. Blackshaw. Sir, the bilateral security guidelines was discussed during the bilateral meeting between President Marcos and President Biden. You mentioned it again today. Could you give us an idea what these guidelines will contain? Will these guidelines answer the Philippines' question, since the Philippines has been wanting to clarify what the United States are commitments under the MDT? And will that also clarify what kind of assets the United States can position at these EDCA sites? If not, could you give us an idea what kind of assets the US can position at the EDCA sites? And my other question, there's a question on maritime patrols between the Philippines and the United States. When will this happen? When it might take place? In what form will this take? Will it be between the navies or between the Coast Guards? Thank you very much.
Okay, lots of questions for Mr. Blackshaw.
No, the EDCA sites, I
still
think
writing them
Professor
down.
and General Bautista can answer them as well.
Okay.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to take one of this? So the first one was about Taiwan, and okay. I'm not going to get into that, the details of that. I think the language of the treaty is there. Nothing happens under the treaty like that. I mean, it is a process of consultation. That's not unique to this alliance. That's true in any alliance. So, and I would say, there's a lot of, just a general comment, there's a lot of attention that is placed on sort of the wording of the treaty. And what does this word mean as opposed to that adjective? And that's all important. But an alliance is not it's not a document like the lease of an apartment. You check, hey, there it said you owe me my security deposit by this date. It's a bond that is much deeper, much more rich and complicated than that. That's the foundation. And that was 70 years ago. So we have built up on top of that all of the kind of the institutional fabric of the alliance, the relationships we've built up between our militaries, between our bureaucracies, between our peoples as well. So any major action to, if there is a crisis, any action to operationalize the alliance, the treaty, is going to be taken in very close consultation at high levels between both governments. And it will be something that is bilaterally agreed. So that does not answer your question, I realize, but also that's hypothetical, it's speculation. I mean, the goal for our alliance, going back to what I said and has been said in some of this discussion, is deterrence. The goal is to deter conflict so that it never happens. So let's see. Second question was about the bilateral defense guidelines, right? So you're right, they're mentioned in the joint statement, and I think in the fact sheet that has been put out by the White House, but the document itself has not been released yet. My understanding is it will be released during the visit. There might be a word or two that's being finalized, but that's normal. My understanding is President Marcos will be hosted at the Pentagon on Wednesday morning. So that may be the occasion where the document itself is released. And in terms of what's in it, I talked about kind of the big picture, what it is. It's sort of a policy document. We have it in other important alliances, for example, with Japan, in which both governments articulate why we have this alliance now, and it's a useful way to sort of lay out how the alliance, what are the contemporary challenges that we face, what are the mechanisms we use to manage it, and to lay out shared priorities going forward. So I think specifically in this document, I don't want to get ahead of the actual release of it, but it will refer to shared priorities on reaffirming alliance foundations, enhancing our alliance coordination, expanding information sharing, modernizing defense capabilities, deepening interoperability and people-to-people ties, combating transnational and non-conventional threats, and contributing to global and regional stability. So in and of itself, there is no dramatic new initiative in the text itself, but it is a very useful milestone in the alliance in sort of articulating why do we have this alliance now. And again, you'll see, I think, in the document, it doesn't talk about third countries. It talks about why the US and the Philippines have this alliance. That's the core of our treaty. That's the core of the alliance, because the security challenges can evolve and change as they have done in this alliance. Okay, I think there was a third question. Oh, yes, okay.
Combined maritime activities.
Yes, that's right. We use the sort of general, broader term, combined maritime activities. Combined is just between countries. I think, like in our own parlance, we say joint when it's the Army and Navy together, or the Air Force and Navy. So, and also, joint patrols is not a term of art on the U.S. side, but it's basically for us. We hope to, and I think there is now broad agreement on moving ahead to do things together again in the West Philippine Sea, in the South China Sea, beyond 12 nautical miles of the Philippine shore. So, as you may recall, previously there was a sort of a constraint on that, on the Philippine side. So in many ways, this is just getting back to normal cooperation that every state can do with partners. It doesn't have to be with a partner with whom you have a treaty alliance. So I think my understanding is both sides are, the policy level are pretty much ready to move ahead. I am not an operational planner, so, and obviously if you're talking about kind of vessels and aircraft, there's all kinds of advanced scheduling and sort of competing priorities, et cetera, that have to be worked through. But I think we're very much looking forward to, on both sides, moving ahead with that. So, hope that helps.
Okay. I'd like to recognize first General Padilla and then Ma'am in pink and then Sir. That would be the last question for the program.
No, it's just a question, but just a comment. But as a supplement to the reply of the panel to the Reuters reporter, Karen, right? I guess it was contained correctly in the first bullet that was presented by General Bautista this morning. And he stated therein that a U.S.-China confrontation will inevitably involve the Philippines and may trigger the MDT as a result. You may have to look at from a practical sense, you may have to look at the core interests of the Philippines in Taiwan. There are thousands of Filipinos there. And in the event of any kind of conflict, our main interest lies in evacuating all our nationals to a safer ground before they get in harm's way. And how do you do that? And what kind of cooperation must come out of that will be the product of the diplomatic channels that will be very busy at any point in time. And this does not involve the alliance actually, but just the diplomatic channels that are already in existence. So it will be Philippines discussing with the opposing forces, Philippines discussing with allies in order to bring out of harm's way Filipinos. So I'm just adding that from the practical point of view of why there is keen interest on these issues. But again, as was pointed out, the main goal of any kind of discussions and alliances is to prevent any kind of conflict. And that is very much enshrined in our Constitution, that we don't subscribe to war as an instrument of policy. So when many countries think that we're being very aggressive in our own territory, I would surmise that they're not looking at us with respect because it's already enshrined in our policy. And we are doing what we just need to do, because if they were in our shoes, they would be doing the same, which is to take a stand. Not necessarily to get into conflict, but to take a stand. And this, I guess, is where one of the weaknesses of the Philippine side is, because we have not been very aggressive. We have repeatedly been shown disrespect by the opposing forces in our parts of, in our sovereign areas. And if you take the case of Indonesia, if I may just digress, there is more respect shown to the Indonesians when they take a stand as far as their territory is concerned, because they have been very aggressive and they have been very emphatic about taking a stand regarding their own rights. So if we do that, maybe, just maybe, we stand a lot more, getting a lot more respect from some of our potential adversaries in the areas.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you very much, General Padilla, for that supplementary comment. I know that there are questions from the Zoom. Some of the questions from the Zoom are already answered, so let's give the microphone. Yes, ma'am?
I'm Alison Jackson from Agence France Presse, AFP. I just had a question for Brett. In the context of the recent expansion of EDCA, growing tensions over Taiwan, the growing threat of China invasion of Taiwan, what did you make of President Marcos's comments on board on his way to the US for this trip, for this visit to President Biden, when he said that the Philippines won't become a military staging post? Just wondering how you interpret those remarks and why he would have made them. And my second question is, AFP, we were one of the media outlets on board the Philippine Coast Guard vessels that were involved in the near collision in the South China Sea recently. I'm just wondering what your view is of the Philippine Coast Guard's more aggressive efforts to publicize Chinese activities in the South China Sea, what you think that this will achieve, and whether the Philippines will be able to withstand the pressure, which I'm sure they're getting from the Chinese, to stop publicizing these activities.
Well, on your, excuse me, on your first question, I'm not going to interpret the president's message. I think his statements stand on their own. I mean, I'm also looking at the statements that are coming out of the engagements in Washington. And I think, look, the United States respects that the Philippines is in this region, and it has big relationships to tend to and look after. I think we're very pleased at the trajectory of our alliance and our bilateral ties. And if you look at these statements that have come out of Washington, they speak to the very high levels of momentum. A lot of that is under the president's leadership, President Marcos and President Biden. On the second question, first of all, congratulations to AFP for embarking on that voyage. I hear it was pretty long. That's not an easy assignment. But, whether one thing I would just correct a little bit is the description of Philippine behavior as aggressive. I don't think it's aggressive. I wouldn't use that word, because it is upholding the country's lawful sovereign rights, and in particular at Ayungin. I mean, there is no other country with any legitimate right under international law there. That's spelled out in the arbitral ruling, which is affirmed under our policy. So the aggressive activity is being done by others. And then will the Philippines withstand the pressure? Well, I'd say the Philippines has been doing a pretty darn good job so far, and has had the confidence and frankly the wisdom to shine a light on what is happening at sea in terms of the pressure tactics they are being faced with.
Okay, so the last question from you, sir.
Hi, I am Andrew Colonzo from Bloomberg. I'd just like to ask all our speakers for a post-mortem and honest assessment of Presidents Biden and Marcos's engagement in Washington. Did the Philippines get anything new from the discussions, or were the reiterations of previous commitments enough for now to deter, to serve as deterrent to other countries, to the escalation of tensions? So that's my first question.
Okay, so we'll ask all the speakers now. Maybe we start with Gerald Bautista, and then the other speakers, and also the speakers online will give their comments.
I don't know if post-mortem is appropriate now. The event is still unfolding. It's not yet finished. There may be other things that may come out of the meeting. It is not the first and not the last. That's going to be a meeting, not just between our presidents, but our other senior officials and down the line. So perhaps the one important takeaway that we're observing a revitalization of our relationship with the United States. In fact, Brett mentioned that earlier. There's been ups and downs in our relationship throughout our history, but the default has always been a good relationship, alliance between our two countries, and we're seeing that happen now. Uh, Also, while we talk of treaties and alliances, earlier it was being discussed that, the issue of automatic retaliation, perhaps that's what Karen was referring to. As Brett mentioned, there are processes of consultation, but we also have constitutional processes even before the treaty is operationalized. So it's going to go through a process while there is a possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Yes, there is, because they have been saying that. Even President Xi Jinping has been saying that they will retake Taiwan, even if they have to use force. So it's all about opportunity and the timing to do that. And that's what we hope to achieve, to deny that opportunity. That's why we're strengthening our alliance. That's why we're building deterrence, precisely to prevent those things from happening. And with that, let me pass it over to Rene.
Oh. Well, I analyze it in two manners. Number one, of course, it's significant because in the last 6 years, there was no political direction regarding the alliance. The alliance has been sustained primarily because of the fact that I would use the term bureaucratic forces. You have the armed forces of the Philippines, who of course strongly defended the alliance despite effort from the top to basically unravel it. So there was no political dimension there, political dynamics. Of course, right now, at least, we have the convergence of that political dynamics and of course the interests of the armed forces of the Philippines, which coincides, which of course give it a greater direction. And I also noticed, of course, when I read the statements that there's a clear effort to modernize the alliance in two ways. So number one, of course,
Recording in progress.
shifting it away. But of course, the first focus, of course, is on the alliance. But the fact that if you read the entire text of the statement, it talks about economic security, it talks about development of renewable energy, talk about, in terms of the, what they call this, the cyber economy, cyber security, so forth and so on. So what is very clear is that's a concerted effort on both parts to simply widen the alliance, and that is something very significant. So that's my take. Brett?
I would agree. We can't say post-mortem yet. Number one, it's not over. Number two, it's not something that's going to die. So, which is usually what post-mortem means. But I would say what we can see so far, and that's really this morning our time, these documents were released out of the meetings at the White House, at the Oval Office. And it's a pretty robust statement and fact sheet to accompany. And I think look, this is a visit of the president of the Philippines, accompanied by the First Lady, much of the cabinet, a whole plane load of very prominent private sector leaders as well. That has, not only does that lead to substance, but it is symbolically important. It's kind of a crescendo of very vigorous engagement over the last 6 to 9 months. And I can tell you our embassy we feel it. We've been working pretty hard along with our Philippine government counterparts. So a lot has been moving in a positive direction in this alliance. In those statements, they talk about tremendous momentum, which sounds like hyperbole, but I can tell you it's real. And there are substantive outcomes of this visit. There were of the 2+2. There were of the bilateral strategic dialogue before it in, I guess that was February. So just in terms of the security alliance, we have an agreement on expansion of EDCA. We have a move towards doing things together again in the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea. Guidelines coming out which include commitment to plan together. We have a roadmap that we're crafting on security sector assistance. All of those things are pretty powerful and important for the alliance. Let alone, and if you look at this particular presidential visit, there's a major emphasis on the economic foundations of this alliance. And when we say alliance, capital A, often we use it to refer to the whole bilateral relationship. So big emphasis on the economic side. One of the announcements was our Secretary of Commerce will be coming out here soon with a plane full of CEOs and C-suite executives from the United States to look at what are actual concrete ways we can expand trade and investment. There's actually a lot of trade investment here that we don't often, that doesn't get the spotlight. We don't have state-owned enterprises. So the private sector charges ahead and does a lot of things on their own. That's one of the great strengths of economic partnership with the US. So hopefully that helps answer your question.
All right, we have no time already. Last one? All right, okay, last
Sorry,
one. Sir.
hi.
Okay.
Hi, last question. I'm Jacob Lazaro from the Philippine Daily Inquirer. I'm talking about using the EDCA sites, the new EDCA sites as a deterrent. But as of late, it seems to be having the opposite effect with China, with the foreign minister describing it as stoking the fire, and even involving the OFWs in Taiwan. So what can you say about this? Like, it seems to be having the opposite effect right now.
Well, that's, I'd say that's a matter of interpretation. And there are two parties to EDCA, the Philippines and the United States. I'm not aware of a third party who gets to veto the arrangement. So, going back to the purpose of EDCA, which there was a lot of discussion on, it is not about one third country. It's about ensuring our obligations under the Mutual Defense Treaty to our mutual defense, and what poses a challenge to our shared security priorities, to the security of the Philippines. That can evolve over time. So that's how I'd answer that. Others may want to address. Sure.
Okay. The mere fact that the Chinese foreign ministry is raising hell about it means they understood the message. It's to deter them. And the fact that they're reacting, if they did not react, it means it's not effective. The mere fact that they're raising hell means they got the message. It will complicate any of their plans, of course, to effect the forceful unification of Taiwan. That's my take.
That's the Chinese narrative, not necessarily the correct narrative. What can be provoking when you build bases in your territory? That is Philippine territory. It's not like what they're doing, that they're building bases on in the West Philippine Sea. That's nothing like that. I mean, so how can you say that's stoking the fire when we are doing it on Philippine territory for the defense of the Philippines?
All right, so I know you have more questions. I have also reserved questions here, but due to the interest of time, we cannot accommodate all of your questions. So let's give a round of applause to General Emmanuel Bautista, Mr. Brent Blackshaw, Dr. Renato de Castro, and of course to our speakers online, Major General Joaquin Malabe, and of course, Dr. Virginia Watsons. Okay, we know that the Philippines and U.S. alliance is evolving. We have the responsibility to foster the international rules-based norms based from the presentation this morning that support the modernization of the Philippine defense capabilities and continue to elevate the security partnerships. Let's work on the prosperity of preventive war in our region and the world. So good day to everyone. On behalf of the Strat-based ADRi, thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.